Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight as we kick off our week-long Facebook Live series around the budget. Joining me tonight are Jennie Huang Bennett, Chief Financial Officer for the City of Chicago, and Pat Dowell, Chairman of the Committee on the Budget and Government Operations. Thank you both for coming here and joining me tonight.
Thank you.
As you know, today the city released our 2021 budget forecast. Today we're going to spend a little time during our hour talking about what is behind the forecast, as well as some key topics regarding our upcoming budget. So the 4-pager is made available today. I'm going to spend a little bit of time summarizing what is in the forecast for those of you who may not have gone through the whole book. This first slide shows a little bit of an overview of our budget. $11.6 billion is the 2020 city budget across all funds. What you'll see on the left side of the chart is all the different types of funds and where the money comes from. The right side of the page, which is all the colorful lines, show where the money actually goes and the different areas from where all of our different funds go to. The other side as well, the other thing that came out today in our budget forecast is the 2020 budget shortfall. So what we usually do as part of our forecast is talk through our year-end estimates. This year, due to COVID-19, we are experiencing an unexpected and significant impact to our revenues, causing them to come in far below our expectations. So what you see on this chart here is that our 2020 corporate fund budget, it was $4.4 billion. Our updated 2020 expenditures, due to other various savings that we've had, is now down to $4.3 billion. But what you will see is that our updated 2020 revenue projections are down to $3.5 billion. And again, this is all due to COVID, which leads to the almost $800 million shortfall that we announced today for 2020. So what are some of the things that we're looking at to help close some of this gap this year? One is the CARES Act reimbursement that you may have heard us talking about today. As you know, we have received funds through the federal government for the CARES Act, and this is help offsetting some of the costs that we've incurred as a city for our COVID-19 response. So there is about $350 million of savings there. Additionally, we are looking at about $200 million of savings from our debt refinancing. Other things that we're going to continue to look through as we continue through the year and towards the end of the year are other service efficiencies, where we can, again, continue to reduce our costs, as well as continued implementation of our hiring slowdown. Next, I want to go into the 2021 budget forecast, which, as you may have heard today, we announced was $1.2 billion for next year. Let's spend a little bit of time on how that number is made up of, or where it comes from. So expenditures, we are estimating that our expenditures will increase by about $421.3 million above our 2020 budget. Where does that come from? Our financial costs will be increasing by $207.9 million. Again, this is for our debt service payments that are increasing for next year. In addition, our personnel costs are also increasing by $91.9 million. Third, our pension costs are increasing by $91.4 million. And lastly, we have about $30.1 million of increases in various contractual services. On the revenue side, we also, due to COVID,
Keep going, I think that's
notice that to pause.
Looks like we might have some sound issues.
We have heard we are having some sound issues, so we're going to pause for a second while we figure out how to resolve it. Thank you for your patience. Okay, we are told we are back on. Thank you all for your patience as we go through our first day of Facebook Live. All right, picking up where we left off, revenues. So as you will see in our 2021 budget forecast, our revenues are slated to decrease by about $783.2 million over the 2021 budget. This revenue loss is representing nearly 65% of the $1.2 billion estimated gap for next year. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of our revenues. CFO Bennett, did you want to talk through some of where we are with our revenues due to COVID-19?
Sure, thank you, Susie. So as it relates to our revenues, as Susie mentioned, we are experiencing a loss of $783 million in the 2021 budget. This represents about 65% of the total budget gap, and as demonstrated by the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing, is really the bulk of what we're facing in 2021. Just to put that number into context, in 2020, we faced an $838 million gap. At the time, it was the largest gap that the city had faced. The city implemented in that 2020 budget over $500 million of structural solutions. So what that means is that they're solutions that carry year over year and help to reduce the future gaps. Were it not for those structural solutions, we'd be facing an even larger gap this year. The remainder of the $1.2 billion gap, after you take out the revenue loss, is very small. And that's the result of the hard work we've done and will continue to do in this budget to help to address the structural imbalance of the city. As it relates to the revenues, the revenue projection is a snapshot in time and will be as we continue through this pandemic. What we know about COVID is that it's dealt us a healthy dose of uncertainty, and throughout the course of the last 5 months has changed trajectory in 3 different ways. We saw cases increase, we saw cases decrease, and then we're seeing cases increase again. If it is that we continue to see cases increase, that number may get larger. If we see those cases start to decrease, that number may get smaller. What we also know is that this is a challenge that many cities and states across the country are facing as well. And what is really important about the fact that the majority of our gap is due to revenue loss is that we need for the federal government to help us in supporting the stimulus that's needed to speed up the economic recovery.
Thank you, Jennie, and I agree on the need for federal assistance as we move forward with this budget. All right, so now that we've talked through a little bit of a summary of our forecast that came out today, let's talk a little bit about what you can expect between now and the passing of the budget and what our schedule looks like. So July through August is when we kick off the budget process internally with our departments. Between August and September, we publish our budget forecast, which, as you know, came out today. When we start our budget outreach with all of our residents here in the city through budget town halls. This year, you'll see through our Facebook Live this week that we're doing this virtually. But this is normally when we kick off right after the forecast, our outreach around the budget. And then we work to balance the budget. So that's where a lot of the work between now and October happens as we get your feedback. We have lots of discussions with all of our stakeholders. We work with all of our department heads as we work towards a balanced budget and to close this budget deficit that came out today. In October, this is when the mayor submits our budget recommendation to City Council. And then between November and December, we work with the Committee on the Budget and Government Operations to hold budget hearings and to answer any follow-up questions around the budget that has come out. And then statutorily, City Council is required to approve the budget by December 31st. The city is on an annual fiscal calendar, so in January is when our annual appropriation ordinance goes into effect officially on January 1st. Chairman Dowell,
Yes.
why don't you tell us about how the Committee on Budget and Government Operations fits into this larger process?
Thank you very much, Susie. Good evening to the people out there. The Committee on Budget and Government Operations is composed of 34 members of the City Council, and our role, our jurisdiction, is over the spending of city funds, whether those funds come from taxes that you pay or money that we receive from the federal government, state government, or even from private foundations or private corporations. We take that money and we decide and approve the budget that the mayor presents to us in October of every year. We also have jurisdiction over the reorganization or organization of city government, and the kinds of things that we worked on, for example, in last year's budget, was approval of the $500 million in structural reforms that CFO Bennett talked about. We also provided new money for affordable housing and homelessness, in addition to new money for violence prevention and mental health. So our role is very extensive, and we see ourselves as the caretaker and stewards of the taxpayers' money.
Absolutely. And I know last year, Chairman, you made a lot of great changes and additions as part of our budget process, which I know got a lot of kudos from other members of City Council. Are you planning on making any additional changes to this process for this year to even make that process better?
Well, Susie, our focus, or my focus as chairman, has to make sure that the budget process is open and transparent. So we try to get information to my colleagues way ahead of the mayor's presentation to us in October. We develop a budget book with lots of information so that those same questions, the usual questions about hiring, vacancies, contracting, that we don't have to ask right in the budget hearing, and we can spend our time on more important questions. We've also tried to strengthen the Council Office of Fiscal Analysis by hiring a director and taking the shackles off of that entity so that aldermen can go directly to them. So we hope to have the same changes, put the same pieces in place for this year's budget.
Great, and I look forward to working with you on all of that. Okay, so next let's go into a little bit about public engagement. Since this is our first day, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on how important it is for all of us to really hear from you, whether it is Chairman Dowell and City Council, myself, and the CFO, about kind of what our residents want to see and expect in our budget. As I mentioned, we're doing this week-long virtual town hall this week. Each day is going to be a different topic where we're going to spend a little bit of time going through some of the general information on different areas of the budget, and then really hope to answer some questions, whether we've gotten them in advance or through Facebook Live. So definitely this is one of the ways that you can participate for this year. Also today, on the website that you see up on the screen, chicago.gov/2021 budget, we've also launched a survey. So, we really want all of our residents to really go through and fill that out. We want to really hear from you about what services are most important to you, what are some of the priorities that you have, and then any ideas you may have about different revenue ideas or different areas where our residents want to see us reduce expenditures. All of this is also available again on chicago.gov/2021 budget. All right, so I know over the last week, after our announcement about this Facebook Live series, we've been asking for some questions from our residents that we can cover today. So we'll start off with our first question that we received, which is, there are lots of questions about different revenue sources, including if we will be increasing property taxes, will we implement a LaSalle Street tax or city income tax, and the feasibility of reintroducing a head tax. I'm going to give that question over to our CFO. Jennie, do you want to start?
Sure. So as we look at our revenue sources, a couple things I would note. In the 2020 budget, we had implemented revenue increases that made both financial sense as well as policy sense. It's important for us as we look at the philosophy for how we approach this budget that we're doing things that make sense from not just making ends meet and having revenues meet expenses, but that they are furthering the policies that we believe in. An example of that in the 2020 budget was the rideshare tax, where we saw increasing congestion in the downtown area and are working to try to increase that tax in order to help address congestion as well as support the revenues of the city. As it relates to 2021, we're going to take a very similar approach. The difficulty that we face in 2021 is that now we're suffering from COVID, and a lot of people have experienced losses, both economic as well as personal. When it comes to property taxes, the mayor said this often, it's last on the list for us. It's not to say that it's not still a tool in our toolbox, given the magnitude of the crisis that we face and the $1.2 billion gap, but it is something that we would like to avoid if at all possible. As it relates to some of the other revenue sources, I think what's really important for us to consider is that we are all part of one city, and that we want to make sure that we're implementing policies that don't cause for us to upset the apple cart and to cause for businesses to leave, for example. We are going to take a look at progressive ideas, as Susie has mentioned. We're going to be taking a look at TIF surplus and other revenue sources that are very progressive. The city has, as a part of the COVID response, implemented utility billing relief as well in order to try to help support residents in their ability to pay various fines and fees. And so we'll continue to look at all of those various sources.
Great. Thanks, Jennie. Okay, next question. Obviously, there has been a lot of interest in the police budget. While we will cover this more in depth tomorrow during our public safety discussion, Chairman Dowell, how do you see us approaching this as part of the budget process?
Well, Susie, as you mentioned, the police budget is a topic of discussion almost by everyone in the city of Chicago. And many aldermen are hearing from their constituents about changes they would like to see in the police department budget in terms of perhaps reducing the budget and allocating those savings to social services, other needs that we have in the city. So instead of just waiting until their departmental hearing in November, we're going to start early this year and look at the police department in great depth. We're going to take a deep dive into that department, and we're going to start that on September 17th at 10 a.m. The Committee on Budget and Government Operations will be hosting a hearing. And I would just tell the people out there, please check in with your alderman if you've got some suggestions or some ideas, or even attend the budget hearing that we're going to have on the 17th. And you can get information from the clerk's website, or you can call the office here at City Hall in the Committee on Budget and Government Operations.
Great, thank you, Chairman. I look forward to that. I'm sure I will be part of that discussion. And let's see. Okay, so we have a question that just came
Susie,
in.
Can I
yes.
add someone thing? I just want
absolutely.
to add that we're going to, look at programming within the department. We're going to look at overtime, and we're going to look at staffing. So those are the kinds of things that we'll be giving some attention to.
Excellent. And, I recommend everyone, in addition to asking questions for the hearing, we're also taking questions that we will be addressing tomorrow as part of our Public Safety Day. So we look forward to that as well. It looks like we have a question coming in from Taylor H. Okay. Mayor Lightfoot just announced today that there is a projected $1.2 billion debt for the upcoming 2021 budget. Chicago Police Department's budget for 2020 was nearly $1.8 billion, not including pensions for police officers. This was 40% of the city's operating budget. Why is Mayor Lightfoot so adamant on not defunding the police by a single dollar while the pandemic wreaks havoc on the city budget? So I can start, and Chairman, if you want to add your perspective. I think so. Realistically, this is the work that we are doing. I don't think that we have talked about not defunding the police by a single dollar, but really I know there's been a lot of discussion about where our investments need to be for next year. And Ms. Chairman Dowell talked about earlier some of the investments we made last year around different services was the start of that. As part of our 2021 budget, with a projected $1.2 billion deficit, some of the work that we're doing with all of our departments is to really go through project by project, every initiative, all the personnel and all the non-personnel at the departments to really see, where are some of the efficiencies we can make and where are some of the cuts that we will need to be making. So police is not exempt from that. They are part of this exercise, just as the fire department, every department really in the city who we are working with to go through this exercise. So, this is something we will be working on as part of the budget process, and, hope to have that broad discussion as we go definitely to budget committee and as we move towards budget.
Well, I don't want to add too much more. I'm not speaking for all of my colleagues. I've heard my colleagues speak of wanting to look at particular programs in the police department, looking at overtime, and I think those are the kinds of questions we'll be dealing with on the 17th.
Okay, great. All right, next question. Recently, the city released an RFI, which is a request for information regarding the casino. Jennie, can you tell us a little more about what the RFI is intended to give us? Yep.
So in the spring legislative session, we secured authorization from the General Assembly to revise the tax rates associated with a casino. What that means is, in essence, we now have the construct and the ability to do an RFP and a competitive process for a casino operator that will be financeable. It's the first time in decades that the city has had an authorization to be able to start that process of a casino development in the city of Chicago. The RFI is the first step of that process. It basically is a request for information, as Susie mentioned, for us to ask industry participants, including operators and other key stakeholders, about key considerations that we should be taking into account as we consider the casino development. There is a union gaming report that has been published, which has a really good layout of some thoughts and recommendations around timing. We are looking to having a RFP out sometime early next year, and then subsequent to that, being able to select an operator to help us in the development of a casino.
Great. Okay, next question. There is lots of interest in utilizing TIF, which stands for our tax increment financing funds, for the city's deficit. Let's talk a little bit about what the city has been doing regarding our TIF surplus. I can start, and then Jennie, if you want to add to that. So last year, we did a aggressive TIF surplusing, which resulted in the largest TIF surplus that our city has seen, which was about $300 million. We will continue to do that for this year, and it's part of the work that we're doing as we get towards budget to really look at all of our TIF funds, all of our different TIFs and balances to see, where, the balance between economic development as well as, where we can surplus for any types of funds that are remaining. So.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to what you said, Susie, is that TIF is one of the, surplusing is one of the more progressive ways for us to be able to return money to the taxing bodies. We have also implemented a number of TIF reforms in order to try to make the use of the TIF funds more transparent, and we'll be continuing to do that as we move forward through this budget process.
Okay. All right. We've gotten a lot of questions and comments from people about the city's pension obligations. I know that was a lot of conversation last year, and it continues this year. Many people think we should end the pension system and move employees to a 401k system. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So let me start by maybe doing a bit of background around the city's pension funds. The city has 4 pension funds. In total, the pension funds are roundly about 23% funded. And what that means is for every dollar of money that outside actuaries, which are in essence experts that tell you exactly what your fund needs to be funded at to be solvent, we currently only have 23 cents on the dollar. Our total pension contribution for this upcoming year in 2021 will will be $1.8 billion, and we are committed to making that payment in order to ensure the stability of those funds. In 2020, the city funded the police and fire funds at the actuarial level, which again is the level that outside experts say the city should be paying in order to ensure the solvency of the fund. We funded that for the first time in the city's history. In 2021, we're seeing an increase of $91 million over what had previously been budgeted in pension costs, and the numbers we released today incorporate that increased cost. We will continue to work our way up that pension ramp as we move forward. The pension funds are funded through a number of different revenue sources. By and large, the majority of the funding for pensions comes from property taxes. In addition to that, there is about $427 million in 2021 that is anticipated to be funded out of corporate fund. And then there are a host of other funds, including some of the enterprise funds, which pay their allocated portion into the pension fund. When we do have a casino online, the revenues from the casino are under state statute required to be paid into the police and fire funds, and so that again will help to support some of those costs there.
Great. All right, let's see if we have any other questions. All right. We received a lot of questions regarding the distribution of funds across the city and how the city can use an equity lens through our budgeting process. Let's talk a little bit about some ways that we are working on to, and what our plans are to really look at the budget through an equity lens. So I can definitely start. So one of the things that we've done this year is to really, is right at the beginning of our budget process, is to work with all of our departments and commissioners. We did a training with our Chief Equity Officer, Candace Moore, to really help us and help all the departments really undertake how we look at the budget request process through an equity lens. So that process is ongoing, and as we have further discussions around not only the investments but also the reductions and how we can continue to look at that through an equity lens. In terms of forecast and accessibility, one of the things that we definitely wanted to focus on for this year is to make sure that all the information that we have around our budget, whether it's the forecast, all of the work we're doing around the outreach, and even as the budget comes out, is to really focus and to make that accessible to everyone. And that includes, translation, making sure everyone has access to this information. I don't know if I said early on, but the surveys we're doing, are available online. They've been translated, and we will also have paper versions available at all of our libraries. So I think, one of the things that we're really focused on, that I am really passionate about, is making sure that we are applying the equity lens throughout our entire budgeting process, whether it's through the request, all of our outreach and engagement that we're doing, and all the way to budget. And as we, answer questions and work with all of our stakeholders to really keep that in mind.
And I think, Susie, that the City Council will flush that question out in better fashion in the budget hearings, because we've had a whole year, the administration has had a whole year of activity, and now we're going to have another budget to look at. I think last year, the last budget process, the mayor's unveiling of the Invest Southwest program was an example of an equity approach to investment, and I think we're looking to see what more is in the budget and how that's baked in the budget.
Great.
For 2021.
And the other thing I think I want to add is, the other part of our outreach, which I didn't talk about, I think, early on, in addition to the surveys, in addition to the Facebook Live we're doing, is our focus groups that we're asking, everyone in our communities, all of our residents, if you want to get together, whether it's your book club, whether it's a real, actual community-based organization, you want to talk about the budget with a bunch of friends, we're also providing that avenue across the city to really, provide us with that feedback. So we want to hear from everyone, and we want to hear from everyone in the city. All right, our next question, with such a large gap, what services will be cut? Will the city have to furlough or lay off employees? So we did get that question a few times today as well. So one of the things that we are really looking towards is, I think in CFO Bennett, Jennie, you talked about, everything is on the table currently as we are looking to close this deficit. However, one of the things I do want to let everyone know is the way we're approaching how we're looking at everything in our budget is really looking at services that all of our residents depend on, and we want to make sure to minimize any type of cuts there. So I am taking a layered approach to how we're looking at all of the initiatives in our budgets to try to minimize the service reductions. First we're going to look at kind of any ancillary programs that are out there that maybe we've started and need to be revisited. So those are some of the work we're doing. In terms of layoffs and furloughs, everything is on the table. I don't have an answer today about, how many or what that looks like, but that is something, as part of all the discussion we're having, whether it's different revenue sources, different types of services that we're providing, that is all part of that discussion. So. All right, next question. This comes from our fellow city employees. Will the city offer a buyout? That is a good question. I think we are looking at a variety of options, possibly not a buyout maybe, but actually, to be fair, we are looking at all the options, whether it's retirement incentives or different things. So I don't have an answer, I guess, today, but that is something that we have also discussed. In addition to other, workforce reforms that we're talking about, how we are reimagining our departments. I think we have talked a lot about, what are the things we've learned during COVID? How are there more efficient ways to provide our services? And how do we get that out there? Even in this post-COVID universe, which, in my opinion, may not go back to how we were prior. So that's a lot of the work that we're also doing as part of, how we get to our budget closing and how we really look at, what the mission is of our departments and the work that we want to provide and the services that we want to provide to our residents. All right. Question from Facebook from Willie Butler. Will Title V continue? That is a good question. I do not know the answer to that one, so we will have to get back to you on that. I believe that is a federal grant program, but I will need to look at that. That is not part of our city budget. I believe that is part of a grant that we have received. So I don't know actually, but I know it's not part of our corporate budget. All right. Let's see.
While we're waiting for another question, are you looking at remote working as a possibility for some city employees? Mm-hmm.
So that's a good question, Chairman. One of the things I do have to say, and this is kind of what led to our reimagining government conversation, is that we're city government. Oftentimes, we are not a remote working organization prior to COVID. So that is one of the things we're looking at, and if there's any reductions. Now, how long we're going to be in this remote status, that's part of that discussion, and how long we're going to be in, COVID and how long that goes. But, we have learned a lot from that, and so that is one of the things we're looking at.
Okay.
Next question, is winter seasonal staffing for city affected by the hiring freeze, I'm assuming? So no, we will ensure that your roads are plowed and they're cleaned. We are hiring, we have instituted a hiring slowdown, but one of the caveats that I am working with all of our commissioners is to ensure that critical city services such as snow removal will continue. We are looking, so that should not be an issue. I'm not sure if that's the actual, where the question was getting at, but. How can you make investments in mental health, housing, or homelessness with such a giant budget gap? I'm going to pass this question to Jennie to start, and then I could definitely add to that.
So I think the response I would give there is that a budget is a statement of values. And even when it is that we are having such a large gap that we have to face, we're still going to make investments where we think are necessary. We did this in the 2020 budget. Again, that was the largest gap that the city faced last year. And despite that, we made a $50 million increase in various investments, including investments in mental health and anti-violence, in affordable housing and homelessness. We are going to continue to look at that for 2021, and it's really important that we adjust our budget according to our values, especially in the context of COVID and all that people have gone through over the course of the last 5 months. So we're going to take a look at ways to continue to make those investments. You saw that in the CARES Act funding appropriation that we made a few months ago. Over $1 billion of federal funds was appropriated to various purposes, again, towards a lot of the social investments that I mentioned earlier. And we're going to continue to look at that as we get into the 2021 budget.
Great. Yes, I was going to add the CARES Act funding. So as everyone knows, and I think as you mentioned, we did create, add more investment to any of those impacts to those areas due to COVID. So I think that will continue as we work through our 2021 budget. Oh, this is a very good question. How does the city make decisions about the budget, and how do you decide what gets funding and what doesn't? That is a very good question. I think let's talk through a little bit about the process. And as with this type of gap, there are going to be a lot of hard choices that I think the mayor talked about today about what gets funded and the priorities. So, in terms of the process, as I talked about earlier on, the departments come in for various requests. So again, kind of what we talked about last year and what will continue this year is, what is our basic mission across the city, by department, and what is it that we absolutely, by municipal code or for a variety of reasons, or other reasons such as, garbage pickup, that's something we as a city, it's a service we provide. Those are the basics. So every year, we look to see, what are the personnel, what are the costs around our day-to-day mission as a city, and that's a lot of the work that we do with our departments. Now, what comes, ancillary to that, I think, is a lot of the values that we talked about today. The services that our residents require, areas maybe of disinvestment that we need to continue to invest in, whether that's Invest Southwest or some of the other initiatives that I know have been launched. So a lot of that after, our basic city services, I think, is really speaking to the values of our city. What is it that we hear from our residents? I think, part of that, as we did last budget, is to really, hear from our surveys. Last year, actually, I think all of us were at the town halls, and we heard a lot about mental health. We heard a lot about, different housing assistance, violence prevention. I mean, these were topics that came out at each of our town halls. So, again, input. I think various stakeholders. I know we work with City Council and all of our residents to really get feedback into kind of what are some of the initiatives that we should be funding.
Right, and I was going to add that during the budget, the 2 weeks that we have for the budget hearings, sometimes colleagues will get together and meet with the department or the department and the mayor's office to talk about ways that we could maybe change the budget so that it reflects more of our values, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
that has happened in the past, and that's the whole purpose of a give and take between the city council and the executive branch.
Yep. And I'm going to take this moment to plug again the outreach that we're doing, the surveys, all of that. Last year, believe it or not, I did read through every comment card that came in, from our town halls. We tried to do a good job of summarizing that, but those things matter. We want to hear from our residents of priorities, and I think that goes a long way for us also as we're working through and making different and difficult choices about what we can and cannot fund into next year's budget. Why does the city have to pay for police lawsuits? What is the city doing to reduce incidents that lead to these lawsuits? Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the legality around this question, but I will talk about some of the work that we've been doing. I think last year we did announce we have a chief risk officer here, Tamika Puckett, who we've been working closely around different risks and also working through kind of our settlements and judgments and the amount that we're budgeting around there. So without going into the legality of why we are paying for them, I think the question about how are we, I can't remember, what was the second half of that question? How are we reducing the costs around that is, ongoing work. I think, we continue to work closely with the police department to also manage some of this risk and improve policies and processes around that. And that's ongoing work. So, I know our chief risk officer is also very much in that process and having those ongoing discussions around those costs. Okay. Question from Jamie Crowless. Will the city look at progressive taxes like the pilot program? Jennie?
Sure.
Do you want to start there?
So I think the response I would have here is that as we look at new revenues in the midst of COVID, it's very hard to think of new revenues that make sense for us, as a number of different institutions, corporations, residents have all been negatively impacted by COVID. We are going to take a look at all the different revenue sources that would make sense for us to pursue. And pilot payments had been a part of the discussion previous to COVID in 2020. Might still be a part of the discussion as we move forward into 2021 and 2022, but we'll have to figure that out in the landscape of the broader economic environment that we're in.
Okay, great.
Jennie, what are pilot?
Sure.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for that, Chairman Dowell. Pilots are payment in lieu of taxes. And so ultimately what the question is referring to is asking for nonprofit organizations in large part who don't pay taxes to provide a payment in lieu of the taxes that they don't pay. Thank you for that.
Great. Next question. Will the city implement any other programs to provide debt relief to our residents? That's a good question. I think, we're always looking for to provide our residents with debt relief, and in a variety of ways. I know there's been a lot of impact due to COVID. I think, we've worked on a variety of services and programs with some of the CARES Act funding that we've received. And that's always, top of mind as we work through the budget process. And, I know we also talked early on at the top of this hour about, how important federal funding is and the different sources that may help us provide additional services to our residents.
Susie, I could probably add to this as well. During the midst of COVID, but even really before COVID, the mayor had implemented a fines and fees reform platform that was very aggressive and very progressive. We, have changed the way that we collect on revenues that are owed. We are no longer suspending driver's license, for example, as a result of debt owed. In the midst of COVID, we've also made some changes in order to help support businesses and residents. The utility billing relief program I've talked about, which gives residents a way to get on a payment plan program, as well as how it is that we collect on various other fines and fees within the city. And so we have been very progressive in this respect. We, will obviously continue to look at other ways that we can improve upon the program. It doesn't happen overnight, but importantly, we have made a lot of changes here.
Okay, what resources has the city provided in response to COVID? How much money has been spent on COVID? I will take the second question first, and then we'll move into the first question. So in terms of how much has been spent on COVID, to date, I believe we have spent almost $300 million. So I believe it's somewhere in the high, it's like 287, but nearly $300 million is what the city has spent to date for our COVID response. This doesn't include additional programs, I think that we've been talking about throughout our time together here, whether it's the housing, the rental assistance, some of the additional funding that we had for mental health. Those are also obligated as part of our COVID-19 response, but to date, I believe it's almost $300 million that we've expended towards our COVID response. This includes both personnel and non-personnel expenses. And I think the first half of that question was what types of resources are we providing in regards to COVID. So I think that's ongoing. I know the Public Health Department is continuing the COVID exams that are throughout the city. I believe we have that contact tracing program, which I know Dr. Arwady had announced. we will continue with housing and other relief programs that we have rolled out as part of that, as well as the small business grants that I know is continuing also. Chairman Dowell, did you have anything you want to add?
No, you mentioned most of them.
Yeah.
In addition to the assistance we provided to the airports as well.
Absolutely. Great. Oh, and also the internet for our
Yep. So we also,
CPS.
as a part of the CRF funds, implemented a program called Chicago Connected. Over 100,000 students will be able to benefit from no-cost internet in order to help support remote learning.
Great. Okay, our next question is from Jake Skiba. Is there an effort to lobby the state so that the city can file for bankruptcy? I'm going to give that question over to our CFO.
I'll take that one. The answer to that is no, absolutely not. We don't believe that bankruptcy solves our financial problems, and importantly, the city has tools in its toolbox in order to address this gap. As I mentioned, in 2020, we implemented over $500 million of structural reforms, which significantly reduced the structural gap that we have to face. It's a gap and long-term financial plan that all the financial rating agencies affirmed, and outside stakeholders such as the Civic Federation had supported, and we're continuing to do that work even despite COVID.
Okay. Question from Jacqueline B. Has the city considered having employees contribute more into their pensions, or the changing the amount paid or the age requirements?
Sure.
Do you want to take that, Jennie?
Yeah. So as it relates to the pensions, I think all of us need to figure out what it is that we can do in order to help create sustainability there. There have been a lot of analyses over the past about what contributed to the unfunded status we're in now, and the very short answer is that everyone ultimately has contributed. We need to be paying more as a city into the fund. We need our employees to be paying more into the city as a fund, and we need more revenue sources in order to be able to help support the funds. We also need reform measures as it relates to the benefits we're providing. And so there are a lot of reasons why our pension funds are the way they are, and importantly, we all need to come together in order to put solutions on the table to help get them to a place where they can be sustainable in the long run.
Okay, let's see. How can I find information about the budget? Oh, good, the city. The budget, you can definitely find information on our website, on my website, which is under the Office of Budget and Management and the city's website. We also have the earlier website that I talked about, which is chicago.gov/2021 budget. But if you're looking for budget documents, which includes our 2020 appropriation, the forecast, those all can be found on the Office of Budget and Management's website. If you go into the City of Chicago's website under in OBM's page, you will find all of the city's documents. And if you want to go further back, I believe our website has the last 10 years. But if you want to go further back, I believe all of that information is also kept on the clerk's website.
And I'll add that if you want to see the kinds of questions that aldermen are asking for during the budget process, you can also go on that site. We had about 658 through the chair requests last year, and that will also be on the budget office website. In addition to any kind of analysis that the Office of Fiscal Analysis has done will also be on the website, and those are analyses that have been requested by the aldermen.
Will the city invest in resources to respond to mental health calls through 911 that aren't the police? I think this question came up during the day, and I think part of our investments, I believe, that we've made both in mental health really talks about who are the best responders that should be responding to some of these 911 calls. I think the mayor has said in her speech today that a lot of times it's for a long time it's 911 and the police, but really who are I think part of this discussion that we're having around the police budget is also, you know, who are the right responders to the various needs that come through on 911. So, you know, I think that's part of the discussion we're going to have. I know on day 3, which is, you know, we will have Dr. Arwada here from Public Health, as well as our partners here with the Department of Family and Support Services. We will have that discussion about, you know, and that's part of the ongoing discussion we're going to have as we approach this budget and further investments, and who are the right people to respond to those calls.
I'll add here too that I think that that's a concern of several members of the City Council who have already been reaching out to my office about finding a way to separate police responses from responses for things that are non-police related.
That's a good point. All right, so it looks like we are closing. So we'd like to thank everyone that participated tonight and submitted questions. As I talked about earlier, tomorrow we will be hosting our Public Safety Town Hall. So with me tomorrow will be Deputy Mayor Susan Lee, as well as Deputy Superintendent Barbara West from the Police Department, as well as Anastasia Walker, who is our new Executive Director for the new department that came online this year, which is our Public Safety Administration. So please be sure to check back tomorrow at 6 p.m. And again, if you have any questions that you'd like us to respond to for that, please make sure to submit them at chicago.gov/2021budget. And again, just another plug to take our survey. And you know, if you'd like other ways to participate in this budget process as we proceed over the next several months, please let us know. With that, I'd like to thank our CFO, Jennie Bennett, and Chairman Dowell for joining me here tonight. And I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Thank you and good night.
Good night.
Good night.